I want to ask about Gaza, but I have a quick question on Syria.
Sure.
I mean, why is all these attacks by Israel and basically coming so close to Damascus? And in fact, they struck Tartus the other day with a bomb that measured 3-point-something on the Richter scale. So why doesn't that raise an alarm? Why is it okay for Israel to keep doing what it's doing, occupy more land?
So if you're talking about, are you talking about something specific, Saeed? Are you talking
I'm talking about what Israel is doing every day. They have occupied more territory every day. They send in their tanks. Now they are in Daraa. They are, very close to Damascus. As a matter of fact, they struck the city of Tartus for no reason. For instance, a bomb that, like I said, measured something like 3-point-something on the Richter scale.
Ultimately, Saeed, what we want to see is lasting stability between Israel and Syria. Israel has said that these kinds of actions and the limited defense of its borders are temporary, and no nation, certainly not even the United States, could tolerate terrorist and other armed militia groups becoming embedded right on their doorsteps. And so Israel, of course, as we've long said, has every right to its self-defense and its security, but what we are hoping for and what we're continuing to engage on is support for the critical mandate of the UN Disengagement Observer Force to uphold stability in the region, and that's something we'll continue to focus on.
So these attacks on Syria are in self-defense?
I will let the IDF speak to its own operations site. I'm not going to opine on those from here.
Let me ask you about Gaza.
Yeah.
The Israeli defense minister said that they will continue to occupy Gaza after the war. Do you have any comment on that? Do you still expect the Israelis to pull out of Gaza once the war is over?
Well, Saeed, it's important to take a little bit of a step back. First, in terms of discussing the outcomes of a potential deal that are still being negotiated, I'm not going to get into that. In general, what ultimately at the crux of this, at the crux of of getting a ceasefire in Gaza, what we're talking about is a deal that would be implemented in phases, and we're all currently focused on trying to get to that first phase, which is about hostages being released, a temporary ceasefire, and a surge in humanitarian assistance. Of course, future phases would have details as it relates to security arrangements inside Gaza, IDF withdrawal, and what the positions and numbers and all those specific details look like. However, as you've heard me say before, Saeed, that a long-term occupation of Gaza by Israeli military forces, IDF or otherwise, would be inconsistent with the principles that Secretary Blinken laid out in Tokyo about a year ago, which is something both myself, Matt, the Secretary himself, have been clear about from the very beginning, directly with counterparts in the region.
Has there ever been any Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories that is not long-term?
Saeed, I'm just not going to... I appreciate your question. What your question was about this comment that was made as it relates to Gaza. We want to see a ceasefire deal first. We're working tirelessly to get that across the finish line. I cannot predict what these phases may look like from here. But again, I will just stress that a long-term occupation of Gaza is inconsistent with the Tokyo principles that we have continued to view as North Stars when we talk about our hope for the region.
A couple more questions.
Yeah.
Now, can you update us on the status of the negotiations? We know that the director of the CIA, for instance, traveled to Qatar, I believe. There's a lot of movement. Do you have any kind of feel for what's going on and what are we likely to hear? Because there's also assessment that you guys are frustrated somewhat.
I'm not going to get into these kinds of details, Saeed. We're working intensely to bring a ceasefire to the finish line so that, in our view, Palestinians and Israelis can live securely and perhaps most importantly, the hostages are returned home. We think a deal is both urgent. We think a deal is possible. I don't have anything new to announce, but we are certainly hopeful that the parties can come to an agreement soon. This is something that we know quite strongly, that this is something that the majority of the world wants to see. They want to see this conflict come to an end, and we share that sentiment. And so we're working tirelessly to play our part in helping bring that about.
Let me ask you about the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
That Israeli snipers have been using it for target practice for a long time, destroying everything in it. And I want to ask you, is this something that the current administration, in its last 30 days, whatever it is, 30 days, can do something basically to ensure, I don't know how you would do it, to ensure that this hospital can actually get back on track in terms of functioning, or must the Palestinians wait for the goodwill of the next administration?
Said, I can't. I'm not familiar with the specific incidents as it relates to this hospital, but what I can say is what we have said previously, which
Not
is
just
that
one incident, I'm sorry, but it's not one
first,
incident. Okay.
Said that Israel must not only comply with international humanitarian law, but it needs to take every possible step to prevent civilian harm. Additionally, mitigating and preventing civilian harm is a moral and strategic imperative. The other challenge here, Said, which we have talked about before, is that Israel is in a unusual, even unprecedented burden place in that Hamas has a long track record of using hospitals and schools and other facets of civilian infrastructure for military purposes. And we know that. And they've built a vast military network of tunnels under civilian areas that put civilians and put civilian institutions like these in the crossfire. And so we've been clear about that, as well as our concerns about such kind of kinetic fighting around hospitals as well.
Right, but
Right.
for the record, it was a Shifa hospital and not Kamal Adwan hospital that, accusations were made that there are tunnels underneath. Not this particular hospital.
Said, we know that Hamas
Right.
uses civilian infrastructure and they have a wide network of tunnels under civilian infrastructure. Certainly, I'm not going to get into tit for tat as it relates to specific places within Gaza, but I needn't point any further than the long, extraneous amounts of public information that's in public reporting as it relates to Hamas's use of civilian infrastructure and their tunnel network.
On
Yeah.
Israel's strikes in Syria, as you just mentioned,
Yeah.
a justification for this has been that Israel's doing this with the vacuum of power, the possible instability, that fears of potential terror threats. How does more bombing, especially one after the fall of Assad, and one that has bombing that registers, as Said says, on the Richter scale, contribute at all to stability or peace?
So we have long said and long believed. First, let's take a step back. Both before the Assad regime and afterwards, malign, destabilizing actors continue to operate in the region and have presence. I'm not a military tactician and certainly not going to get into the details of that. Perhaps colleagues of the Pentagon can do so, but there are malign proxy groups that operate in the region that are hostile to a variety of countries, including, of course, Israel. And so Israel has every right to defend itself. Israel has every right to its security. And as it relates to build up around the border, particularly, as you heard me say, it's our view and our understanding that these operations are limited. But beyond that, I will let the IDF speak to its own operations. We are continuing to remain focused on doing everything we can to maintain stability across the region. We're in constant contact with relevant regional partners and others. We know that this is a shared priority for a number of us.
And to clarify, in response to Said's question, he asked if this was an exercise of Israel defending itself, and you sort of deferred to that question. But here you said that Israel has a right to defend itself.
It certainly
Are
has
these
the right
attacks-
to defend itself broadly. I just don't have enough information as it relates to this particular incident to offer context on the operation, which again, not a spokesperson for the IDF, which I'm sure they'd be happy to answer your questions.
Okay. And then you say that these attacks are temporary, and you refer to these groups. Do you know what Israel's strategic objective is with regards to these attacks? And I know that you've said you're not the spokesperson for them, but the U.S. is providing military aid to Israel, and so these questions do seem relevant. The country providing
Again, I will leave it to Israel to speak to their military operations. Jenny, go ahead.
Any updates on